Is the remainder of a footbridge that kind of helps explain why it was important to have a canal here and the logic behind it. The name, it's called Landsford. Ford is a word that means that the river is shallow enough to be crossed by foot, and that makes it too shallow for boats to cross. But because it was a place that was very important historically for people to cross on foot, they needed to build footpaths. I believe the sign said it was one of 8 bridges that crossed the canal. On the note of people who needed to cross Landsford, it's a very important point on the Catawba River, because the Catawba River is pretty deep and it tends to flood, and having a spot where it's shallow enough to cross on foot meant that this place has been a popular place for armies over the years to cross during the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. And a lot of people built their farms and plantations along the Catawba River here because it was a place where they could potentially transport their goods. And that's another reason why the canal was built, was to help the transport of goods. However, at the time, North Carolina, which is just upriver from here, was known as the Rip Van Winkle state because there was such little growth that it appeared to be sleeping industrially. So there wouldn't have been any economic reasons to continue this canal upriver until about 5 years after the canal shut down, where North Carolina experienced 15 years of rapid growth, where it's pretty much been a industrial powerhouse and economic miracle if you were to think of how it was completely asleep, according to even the federal government of the US. They made a statement at the time that's kind of amusing to read if you're a history geek. Right here is another point, one of the first points we've come across, where the canal meets back up with the Catawba River. So I've kind of noticed that the part of the trail I've been walking along looks like there's been a lot of land that has been moved by man, but there was no signs that explained it. But it appears that this explains it here. Here, let's go along this. Right here is that underpass. You can when I move, you can see where that hole is in the stone. And I took a short video of the illustrations. You guys can see we're inside where that elevated part of the canal was right now. We're between both sides of the bridge. You can see some of the fallen stone that crosses over this part here. But the stream obviously was already there. They built the elevated part over this stream here. And we were standing in between both sides, right down there, where this is just falling away over time. Notice this little walkway going up to the side of that bridge. Everything I've tried climbing on has had a storm of ants as soon as the minute I touch it. So wish me luck. Hopefully there's no snake up here or something. But yeah, I see a lot of people have walked up through here. Okay, here. We're up on top of it. This is probably the view that they would have had. Imagine, right here is the canal. And then over here is probably the same thing they would have been looking at from the top of it. Probably a bit more clear cut, of course. And I believe there's a bit of a game trail. I believe that maybe was a walkway they would have used. I'm just covered in spider webs now. Spider lilies, that's what these plants are called, growing all along it. This is the largest concentration of spider lilies as far as I'm aware of. It seemed to say that it was the largest in the world, but I haven't done any confirmation of that. During spring, all of these green patches you guys see along the river would be blossoming in white spider lilies all over it, which must be beautiful. So this sign here shows some of the men building this canal, and it would have been a combination of both Irish laborers and African slaves who built this. Here we are standing at another one of the walls of the canal that remains standing. So the canal would have been above us, and this would have run under. Okay, so there is where we just were, and I'm positive we are inside where the canal once ran, because right there is where the walls of the canal are. We'll be exploring down there quickly, but let me talk about this. There's another wall right there. Right here it says that this was once the place of a lumber mill that the canal would pass by, and I believe the lumber mill seems to have been built before the canal. And then there's a weir, which I believe is, again, so this is where I think that was, and then here is where I believe the weir was, and there's a big tree growing out of it now, you can sort of see. And then the water level must have been much higher, because you can see the tops of the canal are up there. So we're back inside the canal. My voice kind of sounds echoey to me. I don't know if it'll pick up for you guys, but this must have been running this was horizontal to the lumber mill that we saw the picture of. I love that there's illustrations of what this once was, because it really helps appreciate what was once here, and really the power of the flooding that has gone on over the years, or at least the poor construction of this. And one of the things that interests me about this canal are the economic principles behind it that you'd think would support it. So in the book Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, which is pretty much the economic basis of the United States, so it makes sense why they would follow its principles if they were even considered. I mean, this was designed by a Scottish immigrant to the United States at the time, who probably was aware of Adam Smith and John Locke, who were both British, and I'm positive that Adam Smith is Scottish, if I can remember. I believe. But he points out a rule that seems to be true even today, that the best predictor of economic success in countries and areas that aren't directly on the coast is the access to navigable waterways, meaning rivers, and would require canals such as this to even begin to have any series of economic success. But unfortunately, as you can tell by the size of the locks, which you guys will either see later in the video or before this portion, that no boat traveling up this canal would have even come close to competing with the railroads that were being constructed at the time. There's the entrance to that lock system. It's unfortunate we can't go further. It's a mile down that way, south, but there's no trail to it. It's probably somewhere in the woods or off the side of the Catawba River if you were to canoe. But unfortunately it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to get there today. But I'm sure it looks just like this one, so imagine this but twice. This house is pretty interesting. It was built in 1770s, I believe it said. There's a paper up there, I'll confirm it in the notes. But it's called a dog trot style house with 2 rooms separated by a breezeway you guys can see in the middle. There's no doors there. It kind of looks like it on the camera, but it's just a porch. And then there's an attic. There's a bit of a window you guys can see. I thought it was fascinating. It was rebuilt, and it was disassembled, moved here, and rebuilt almost entirely with original parts except for the roof, it said, and some of the floorboards. Pretty interesting to me.